Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. The title is Awakening of the Lions of Mankind. And so I want to speak about ever present existential roars. I'll get into what I mean by that. But I want to focus on the metaphor of the lion as not just a metaphor for the strength of the character of the tasks ahead for the human being, but that when a lion roars, the whole universal sector becomes aware of its inner reality. And so we are human beings that are becoming aware of, as time goes on, more and more a sort of subtlety between our inner realities and our outer realities. The more we go back in history, the less there was an acknowledgement of the inner reality. When I say the less, I mean, I'm not saying that the ancients did not see a metaphysical universe to the physics that they could not explain, but I'm simply saying that imagination was wilder back in the day. That means imagine you and your friends are walking and suddenly somebody comes out of nowhere and like starts attacking you with a sword or something, right? And so what the potentials of what could happen were more intense, even though their brains could have been less exposed to incidents. For example, a new incident back in the day could have had more of an intensity than somebody who's exposed to so much data in 2019 having a new experience. Really, man is left with moments where he can explain, he can refer to other moments, and moments where he can't. You see, on some level, yes, society, civilization requires to play the truth game. It requires to attain its greatest precision of an existential truth. This is why science should keep marching. But the thing is that sometimes it's not about what we find, it's about where we bring back the finding. And so I noticed that human beings are living in their private rooms. And it is only when a person is willing to see more than they know that they will hear the heartbeat of the species. You won't care for something that is just okay. When I was much younger, this is like, stretching more than 10 years ago, I think. Sorry, less than 10 years. 8 years ago, I did not care. It was as if like I'm that dude on the Titanic who did not care. I wasn't at the consciousness level of those violinists, who were sacrificing their position on the boat for others, you know. I was in a state where I was like, I was chasing what my mind felt. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way of saying it. My emotions had, in some sense, possessed my thoughts. What that means is when a moment like that happens, it means the idea of self, which provides an emotion, has surpassed more than the idea of the world, which can change your emotion. Welcome, guys, to the chat section. Uh, wel- Welcome to the talk. What I'm trying to do is wonder about how things are being, only to realize that based on the references I have as a sense of doer, reality comes into meaning. For me, it's anytime something is incomprehensible, it's like looking at geometry. Imagine the first person looking at a square. The person has never named the square. There's no name for the square. But imagine being the first person looking at the square. You are seeing, in some sense, something unknown that, based on the inner application, requires to be given meaning. A lot of things in this life, if I just choose to see it as a materialistic way, it would be one of those things where you can become heartless very easy by being convinced that your heart is somewhere else. I have been in environments where I remember it was there was a time in Iran. It's of course it's a theocratical society, so many people have religious values in that society. And so when me and my brother were visiting from Canada, like in the summer, we were visiting there. We go to this place called Imam Reza's tomb, which is in a mosque, and we go there. And what happens is, while we're there, we're doing the kind you know how, like Muslims, they call it wuzu. They wash their hands. Oh my God, guys, this thing was on mute and I was just talking. To quickly catch you up to what I said, I was sharing this experience that in 2016 in the summer, me and my brother from Canada visit Iran, or where we were born. We go on this event to outside of Iran, in a city called Mashhad, where there's a religious tomb of a religious figure. Now, people go there, of course, to pray and make wishes, but it has become such a traditional part of life, that we don't, it's like people have to realize ideologies are integrated everywhere, and so what that means is sometimes you step into an environment and the thoughts, before you have them in your head, come from the environment. So anyways, we're there, and there's something called wuzu, where in the Muslim world, they wash their face, their arms and their legs, as a symbol, as an action of purity, before they go to a religious place, like enter a mosque or pray. And so the thing is, while we were there, me and my brother are there. This is, I think, in 2016 or something. Like, when we go there, it's like the whole family was going, like my grandparents and aunts and all of them were going there. So we go there, and as what's happening is, my brother is washing his hand. He's washing his hands, and like in that kind of religious way, like we're doing it, as kind of participating in the moment. And this lady out of nowhere comes and starts telling my brother, "You're washing your hands wrong, kid." He comes and says, "You're washing your hands wrong. It should be like this and like this and like this," And my brother, in that moment, I could totally see his ego being like, "What the?" And so my brother says, "Okay, thank you," like an odd thank you, and the lady leaves. And I look at my brother, and my brother's kind of like, "Do you believe some people?" And I'm like, I look at my brother and I tell him, it's like, that was divine, man. That lady, out of nowhere, from her universe, felt she could do that. That means, as if like a thought arose where it gave her that permission or something, of course. And it was so I remember, it's like my brother was kind of like, what is this, And I was like, "Yo, look at it. This is what it is," And Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that there was a sort of strictness in that lady's minds of how a sort of action should happen. And what I realize about any person who the truth has given itself a little glimpse, like the truth allows the individual to get a glimpse of what happens, is incredible restriction of access occurs. As if one person entered a house through one door, and afterwards when people ask that person, what's the door to enter, that person says, always this door, because I entered it through it. So what it is it becomes a bias of one's personal experiences. So I'm trying to make people aware of the subjective realm, but eventually the full maturity of the being is an objective to the emotional realm as well. The emotion is not just subjective. Sometimes it has to do with how the soul how can I tell you? It's like the expressive value of the existence of a thought has an emotion. So what I'm trying to say is that moment was an example of structures of ideology inside a structure. It's fascinating for me. If the moment the human being can treat its state of mind as a room, it will free itself unimaginably. That was one of those things that kind of the logos whispered in my ear. What was it, like in 2015, 2013? I had a moment where suddenly I wrote down this article out of nowhere, where in that article there was an explanation of different rooms of being that the person can find themselves in. What does that mean? That means as I'm speaking right now, if I choose to harbor an identity too fixed, the listener's ears will be shaped to my reality, right? But on another level, I try to pilot non-conceptually. There's this thing I speak about the pilots of consciousness often. It's kind of, I guess, Mr. Within's way of acknowledging the lions of mankind that will wake up. And what it is the pilot of consciousness. I pretty much took the metaphor. I noticed something fascinating. I noticed in philosophy, people's professions really defined their philosophies. The dude was a blacksmith. You asked them, what God do you believe in, man? And the blacksmith was like, how dare you make fun of Thor? And so it becomes one of those things where the profession, where the blacksmith's hammer in his mind he was doing similar movements as Thor, even though the hammer was different. And so what I mean by that is that we cover ourselves in language. We dress up in language. If you ask me, hey man, what's your beliefs on this or that? I'll tell you, all right, these are the clothes I have in my closet. These are the ideas that I have wondered about. But there are always limits. That's the most crucial thing. We are an advanced civilization, not because we have limitless technologies, but because we are aware of our limits. That's the only thing that would make us advance. We are aware of our blind spots, right? So before mastery comes that phase where you learn from the blind spots of all your lifetimes. Can you imagine how many blind spots? It's unfathomable. I find that there was a concept Sri Ramana Maharshi spoke about. I think this concept still has utility. You see, I treat language as citizens of mankind. I feel the same way a person enters a society is the same way also an idea enters the society. It enters with an influence. Okay, but the thing is that certain ideas is like it's like nothing is dangerous in this life. It is the intent of the user that can be. So what I'm trying to say is that is if we have given certain ideologies membership and citizenship in our mind, in our subjective realm. Now this doesn't mean kick all the thoughts out of your sphere of awareness. Really, the wise man doesn't touch thought. You only evoke thought when required. That means, like right now, I have to share something from the inner reality. I'm using language. But for example, when I'm like drawing something, or when I'm doing something, writing something, and like this, in many moments in my life, I am not an ideological creature to myself. I realized that since my youth, that this is why playfully some people ask me, like I have a twin brother, and he remembers certain things from our childhood that I have no memory of. And it's like I've wondered why, there was not that I wonder, but I've never had a issue with dynamic phenomena. What I mean by that is that it's like I would playfully tell my brother. It's as if I told my father once too. It was I think it was too much to say, but but I told my father that it's like in my childhood I wasn't here. I wasn't in the body. I wasn't even a body. I wasn't even a concept. I was just the prime experiential observing mover. That means it's what's fascinating is our ancestors are not our parents, and their parents and their parents. Our ancestors is the key going into the engine of existence. That means to truly honor your past, you're honoring what the past saw, which was your future. Did you know? I have asked many people who had entered this system of life earlier than me, and I asked them what's the meaning. And you know what they said? They said carry on. It's like I'm gonna post this video here. There's this video I have. I think it's meant to be. It's by a man named Rick Rigsby, and in the talk yesterday I kind of explained it, but I guess in this talk I'll put the video for you so you can and anybody can go listen to this. It's this man's speech was so powerful. It's here, guys. Here, I'm gonna put it in the chat section. So Rick Rigsby, he says something very important. He goes through a loss. He's at a funeral. In that loss, with his father also there at a funeral. And imagine being a father and you're at your son's kind of funeral of your son's loss of loved ones, right? So the father is there and he can see his son going through a hard time, and he looks at his son and he says, "Keep standing, keep standing." And I have never felt two words as powerful as this Rick Rigsby's story. Of course, I've heard many speeches of power, but I'm saying this speech was so powerful because in it was a resolution to emptiness. There's a talk I will probably write after when this one finishes. I'll dive into that. The next talk, guys, I'm going to be giving is perhaps the most important finding. It's my conclusion after 5 years of giving these talks. Something that suddenly tell you now, give you a preview. The title is going to be called "We Are All Reacting to Emptiness." But anyways, let's focus on this talk here. The concept of a lion, of course, in certain groups of people, it was a symbol. It was like a symbol of the spirit of nature. I find everything that has design can become archetypally filtered. What that means is when the human being looks at something, based on the extent and duration of looking at something, the mind projects various layers of image on that object, and that's how depth accumulates. So when you see, like if you're having a conversation with someone and they're like, "Yo, that's deep," let me tell you why that's deep. Because it is seeking beyond the surface. The moment you go beyond the surface, you acknowledge another dimension. Therefore, the world is becoming slowly and slowly more multidimensional, right? So what I mean by that is that, believe it or not, this is something hilarious. For the first time on this planet, we require to be responsible for the multidimensional potential of our vision. This is why it's easier to walk alone. I don't find that those people who walk alone are per se the strongest people. They may have an alpha position because they see something the tribe doesn't. Like that was the whole point of the shaman. The shaman wasn't there to kind of lead people to war, but because he lived outskirts of town and would visit rarely, when he would visit, he would see things in ways that people would not. So this is why the shaman was a more insightful human being, because the shaman was less distracted than the people who were in the center of society. In the Sufi tradition, there's a saying, they say enlightenment is acknowledged as a pearl, like Pearl, as a pearl. So back in the day, people in the streets were like, hey man, does that, yo, who has the pearl? Does that guy have the pearl? Does this person have the pearl? You know? They were looking for truth, in other words. And so there's a saying in the dervish tradition where they say the person who has the pearl truly is not the person who's attained the pearl in the mountains, but the person who still has the pearl with him even when he's in the busiest marketplace. And that pearl is a state of mind. And mind is something that can't be really stated. It's definitely beyond the language threshold. This is why I say you guys have to, anybody who speaks about the unknown, listen to them playfully. Because on some level, it's as if we are all in an unexplored terrain. Internally too. But the mind is very phenomenal. That means it's like our free will at its core is intention to move phenomenology. In some of my earlier talks, I evoked the image of, it's like I said, I remember like I was in UK and I was walking towards the downtown area of Birmingham. And so as I'm walking, in my mind, I suddenly wondered, whoa, 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 how come my imagination has never fathomed what the size of a lion would be if the lion was the size of a skyscraper. And then my mind suddenly saw these giant lions, these glowing white lions, kind of like with like starlight kind of light, just running between the streets of our most busiest streets. And it was a playful, of course, momentary, you can say, visualization in my subtler planes of abstraction. But what it was that I realized the weight of a metaphor. I realized that we are all, believe it or not, like lions. I'm not joking. The mind is behaving lion-like. It's behaving lion-like because the lion has to kill its own food and then eat it. It has to trust its reality. And whenever it comes moments where its reality is being challenged, what does the lion surrounded by wolves do? Immediately make them aware that it is not a wolf, it is beyond it. The roar of the lion is saying, as if like, my mind is here, how dare you. Lions roaring is fascinating and terrifying. When a lion roars at you, that's a moment where you're like, okay, maybe I shouldn't look at lions. But what it is it is the development of potential through the momentum of vision. I find man has gotten so smart, his intelligence can't be contained anymore. He is realizing the mind that is alert and awake through the human form has no owner. Its owner is not a concept. So what does that mean? That means be aware of what momentum, movement of manifestation evokes life into the room. You know, guys, one thing I have to trust that the listener is able is to discern when I am speaking about the subjective realms and when I'm speaking about the objective realms. The subjective realms, you got to understand that every psychologist knew this. that the creature is at first trying to acknowledge what the meaning of isolation is. Our troubles are when we don't know what to do when we are alone. When you're, imagine you had a friend right now in your life that every time you had a problem, this friend suddenly came out of nowhere and fixed it. And you ask this friend, why are you doing this? And the friend is suddenly says, because I can. That's the only reason. So you would suddenly notice, and this friend is actually a part of your mind that till the last moment, till in the darkest hour, will fight until it becomes the dawn. This is the part of human nature where it's strong. It's strong because it has endured. You think 4 billion years of evolution hasn't brought with it a sort of strength in its pocket? A sort of ability? We should have a banner, I find, as a species that represents the collective spirit. Now, the concept of a spirit, what we say is, the fascinating thing is, I found this to be the fascinating thing. I got to say this before, that Abrahamic religions painted a picture of the world at the same time saying the picture of God is unfathomable. So truth is outside of reality, but we are only seeking stuff that's real. What it is evolution in the observer, of the observer within, and evolution of the object of observance without, the objects and subjects of observance without. It's another way of saying your physical body is there's a distance between the physical body and the true self, the observer within, and then there's a more subtler distance, more intimate relationship between a subject of observance. That means the observer is not just looking at one dimension. The witness is not present in one way. What it is at the end of the day, every child that goes into any sort of educational system is being given pictures to acknowledge and incorporate or integrate in their universal view. I find that people, the true. Sometimes it's not about how the words are; it's about the images that the words point to. And I can't emphasize this enough, that, dear listeners, language is a tool. It is not the ultimate. It's a finger pointing to the stars, where we shouldn't get caught in just looking at the fingertip, but looking at the stars. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a Vedic story. That means it reaches our ears from, Indian metaphysical culture. The story is that there's this ashram where there's this man who's awake, who's pretty liberated, and he's there with his disciples. And one of his disciples is telling the story that one day this intense guy, this super alpha guy, imagine, alpha presence, wolf pack guy, he comes in and he's acting like he's enlightened, and he says to this, he's not acting like he's enlightened. He comes to the stage and he's like, "You are enlightened? Tell me exactly, give me a mantra of truth. Give me a mantra of truth." And then the guy says, "You're not ready." The enlightened sage looks at him and he's like, "Okay, you want something too quick. You're not ready, man. You haven't understood the battlefield yet. You're too..." He doesn't, like, he says you want it too quick, but the guy is so intense. He's like, "No, if you're enlightened, you will give me the answer right now, right here. You will give me the mantra. Tell me a mantra." And the guy closes his eyes. He's like, all right, buddy, relax. He closes his eyes and tries to feel out what the moment has to say. And he tells them some mantra that intuitively comes to him, to the enlightened guy of the ashram. And so he tells this mantra, and this guy suddenly, the moment, you got to realize this, guys, this is something about the alpha mindset. It's only alpha when it wants something. The moment it gets it, it's like a child who received its candy. You know, there is fake alphas everywhere, you know? It's, to be honest, it's a response to a moment. There's no such thing as a person being alpha all the time. It's just the vision of the world they have is just more possible than others. But anyways, here's the thing. So this guy is given his mantra, this strict kind of intense kind of guy who wants to get enlightened like ASAP. Like he's looking for ASAP enlightenment, you know? What happens is the guy gets the mantra from the sage, enlightened guy. He goes into a room, and uniquely, all the disciples and even the guru in the ashram is kind of impressed. He's like, this guy's been in this room 1 week, and non-stop the guy's repeating his mantras. That mantra the guy gave him, it's like this man really had an effort. So for 1 week straight, just imagine 24 hours. That's intense. That means you want to know truth to such a degree that it doesn't matter the cost. So this guy was actually a pretty bright soul. But anyways, I'll tell you the story gets funny. Some people have their egos kind of broken in hilarious ways, in intense ways. And that's a blessing in disguise. So here's the thing. The guy says mantras in the room. This kind of disciple, new disciple, he says all the mantras really, like, you know, he just starts saying the mantras. And after a week, he comes out of that room, and this is another disciple telling the story, and he says that when the guy came out of the room, he was kind of glowing. There was something different. And then the guy comes up to him, comes up to the guru, and he says, I am enlightened. I see God in everything. I see God in you, and in you, and in you. You know, and then the guru's like, okay, something's off. And the guru's like, let's test this. Let's see if this guy's truly seen the vision. And what he does is he gives the guru gives that guy who came out of a week, he gives him this bag, and he's like, all right, man. He validates the guy's ego. And he's like, all right, now go to the store, marketplace, and buy everyone vegetables. All right? Here's the money. Just go and buy everybody vegetables, you know? And the guy's like, I see Brahman, I see God in everything, every moment I will do this. And he takes this and he goes, right? I'll get into the psychology of the guy after the story, but hear this out. The guy goes to the marketplace. As he's walking, he's having the most divine and incredible experience. He's like, wow, I see God in that. It's all the same consciousness. It's all universal. He says, I see God in the tree, you know. And as he's going, right, suddenly people are running from the marketplace, like scared. And people are running, and one of the guys who's running sees this guy heading to the marketplace. He comes up to him. He's like, hey man, don't go there. There's a crazy elephant there, right? In the marketplace, it's dangerous. Don't go, you know? And the guy's like, don't worry, man. I see God in everything. I see God even in that elephant. You know, and the guy goes. And he goes in the marketplace, and there's this kind of bewildered thing, and he doesn't listen to his sign. He goes. And he goes, and he finds himself in that moment where the vegetable bag is like in his hand. He's God in the vegetables. He's told himself, I see God in everything. So he gets the vegetables and all this, and he goes. You know, it just puts I guess because there was nobody in the market, he would put the money right on the table of the guy. What happens is, suddenly the elephant goes in a frenzy, and this guy's around, and this guy starts getting whacked around by this elephant. The elephant starts being wild, and this guy gets thrown. This guy who saw God in the elephant gets taken by the elephant and crushed. Not crushed, but you know what I mean, he gets hurt. And suddenly the police come in, right? The police suddenly somehow are aware, and like some people were watching the elephant to see what it was doing in case anybody was in danger. So they quickly come and save this guy, and they take the guy to the hospital, and he had minor injuries, right? And the guy comes back to the thing, and the guru's like, "Oh my God, that's intense!" Like everybody in the ashram listens, and the guru at the end smiles and says, "Hey man, I gotta point something out." And then the guy who sees God and everything, who's so angry, he's come up to the thing, he's come up to the guru, and he's like, "What is this, man? For a week I've been saying this divine mantra. I saw God and everything, and then the elephant crushed me. What is this? The mantra didn't work. It's your fault, you know?" The guru says, "Hey man, you saw God in everything except the guy who came and told you don't go to the marketplace. He said you are cherry picking what you want to see God in. But the true vision was one that was, you couldn't discriminate. That means some of I consider myself a soldier when it comes to those beings who they could see the truth of the world in anything. That means it's as if like deep down I know that because I'm assuming a sort of collective purpose, I give myself permission to give these talks, even though I know that there's people from everywhere perhaps scolding me with their assumptions. That means as like to every one person that may be smiling to this talk, there may be a couple frowning, or to every one person frowning, there may be a couple smiling. But I'm saying like the whole idea is that some attempt has to be made in an existential opportunity. Every day happens once, so therefore it makes sense to live life. Speech is the next part of our living. It's the next part of our communication, is the next evolution of the mind. But anyways, the guy in the story was cherry picking his heaven. And that's what I mean. That's when you want something quick enough, it's as if there's too many ripples in the pond for you to even see from the surface of the pond, from the surface of your mind, how the cosmos is being reflected. It's kind of like this, guys. It's kind of like just honoring the moment. Honor your moment. What does that mean? That means you may go somewhere and you may not know who those people are in that moment, but honor the moment. Assume every person's greatest self is standing beside you, even if they don't know it yet. There was a time where, how can I tell you, like the observer within realized every phenomenological movement in the moment is the teaching. That means the student dies into the teacher dies into the teaching. The teaching could never die. I find that we have to find a new strength as a species to create a new narrative where the children of the future generations are not entering the world truly empty-handed, but they have opportunities of resolve. So I want you to consider that we are creatures, humans, of a history where in this history there has occurred many rebellions, many movements of human beings looking at a system and being like, "Hey system, why are you acting this way?" And so they have realized their conscious effort is now. So what does that mean? That means there's a state of mind. I want you to think as if every human being's mind is together a field of intelligence where Mr. Within is calling the mind of the civilization, the mind of the Homo sapien sapien. In other words, your mind is a drop in an ocean of expression. The question comes, why does it rain when all these raindrops enter the same ocean? Because in some sense, man has to learn to, once seeing life a little bit multidimensional, to be able to put it down. So pretty much I kind of noticed this. Let's say we want a species where every being's unique DNA has attained its master ability. This was kind of, again, something the logos whispered into my ear, whispered into my heart in some sense, where the term came, the crystal responsible mind, a crystallization of the intellectual multidimensional potential of interpreting phenomena. What does that mean? That means we are not also meant to linger too much in our inner realms. We are meant to acknowledge them, but we're not meant to linger too long in it. It's not. It becomes unnatural. It has consequences on the physical body when you live too ideological. When the ideological, your attention is more on ideology than reality. You see, a part of our experience is so instantaneous that really, how can we define it? How can you define an instant? The lions of the future generations, the lions of mankind will awaken when they acknowledge mortality. Things are temporary. It's like, why not allow freedom? Why not, as the Zen masters say, climb the mountain by starting at the top? That means your mind, the only thing I think people should have understood from law of attraction, that your mind plays fetch with its own imagination. Let me say it more discreetly, more respectfully. The mind is when it truly comprehends mortality, will realize, will release, will give itself inner authorization. This inner authorization means that because you as a being want to see what the greatest design in the moment is like, your mind is acknowledging an ability to be that greatest design. So the law of attraction, I don't know what people are doing, repeating affirmations in the mirror. That is the most unnatural, robotic thing I've ever seen. To go in front of a mirror and repeat a word endlessly is like, there are other ways of being a robot, guys. Just wait a couple years and they might plug your head into a computer, you know? If you want to say affirmations in the mirror, if you want to just repeat, you see, the ritual is important. Ceremony is important. You know, evocation of a novel value is important. But at the same time, obsession is not. You know, it's like the conscience is like the older brother, and the conscious mind's kind of troublesome decision in the moment is like the younger brother. And the older brother can't control the younger brother, but can look at the younger brother in a way where, like, what are you doing? You know? You know, that can collapse into honesty. That's the thing with siblings. Siblings that find each other of a sort of equal mind also realize that they are free in the presence of each other. Do you know? It's so fascinating that nobody said it, but they should have. It's okay to be you. But it's just that the whole species, without knowing, is subconsciously reacting to emptiness. What does that mean? That means I realize, oh my God, it's not a philosophical pursuit. It's not purely just as Carl Jung didn't see, couldn't even guess this part of what happened to civilization. That we ended up becoming creatures that feared our end. Sometimes I wonder if the child that is born cries because it knows it will die one day. You know, every time that tears have, stepped out of my eyes, there have been moments where mortality has been acknowledged. You see, that was the only way. The whale, the whale that's hiding the eternal is mortality. It is shape. It is light going through various lenses to be you. Lenses of interpretation, movement. we find ourselves alone in two ways. One, the objective self is alone in an endlessly objective universe. And this part is the best part of the talk, guys, because it has to do with the world that is big. A big world. We are the small in a big world. What does that mean? That means our evolution is towards the bigger. We look at the scale of our civilization, it has become bigger. We look at our population, it has become bigger. We look at the depth of the human mind, it has become bigger. It has only become bigger because it has been able to remember and also be able to incorporate the new finding. I want to say that any human being that masters confronting stillness and silence and masters confronting noise and movement. If you can be a human being that could just sit in a moment and there could be nothing, no movement, nothing's happening. And when you look at yourself, it's pure silence. Silence is the edge of the subjective realm. Stillness is the edge of the objective realm. And they are edges to a simultaneous moment of witnessing. This inner moment of witnessing is really what's in man's reach. In other words, the conscious state is a magnificent opportunity for a creature to experience its individuality, but the only way it can experience its individuality is because it's having a relationship with its collectivity. That means the stuff in the space is having a relationship with the space as much as it's having a relationship with the stuff. So what it is I'll tell you, human life is a simulation that is a very complex, every person's mind is doing it in a unique way, interweaving of subjective and objective values. So the thing that I realized is that we truly reach, as this is a term I've created, I call it the insighteers. Two E's, you know. So these people are, how can I tell you, we are creatures that before we act, we are in a marketplace of vision. Right now I'm sitting in this room, my attention can go on many objects. Because my attention goes on one object, then it goes to another object, then to another, the reality is simulated linearly. This is why time seems to be always moving us forward. It's like even Alexander the Great knew that the greatest conqueror is time. We have even in the Mahabharata, this ancient Vedic text written by the beloved hands of Rishi Vyasa, that in the Mahabharata, the narrator is time. The narrator is time. How fascinating is that? Time that gets to see everything, full freedom of the observer. Rishi Vyasa was such an advanced writer. He's one of those first pilots in this plane of existence. One of those early advanced communicators. This dude wrote 18 books on leaves. And after writing these 18 books, you know, these 18 Puranas, you know, he wasn't satisfied. He had written solutions and resolutions and strategies, metaphorically, to all of civilization in the Puranas. But he was not satisfied. And as the stories say, that Rishi Vyasa in that moment, an angel visits him through a person nearby or something. And the angel says to Rishi Vyasa, until you write about your love of truth, you will not be satisfied. And it's in that moment Rishi Vyasa understands that the most genius ego must be broken too. And so what happens is he sits down, and the love of God is a dissolution into a universal experience. and into a non-dual, that means it's beyond language, non-dual, pure experiential, direct presence thing, right? Rishi Vyasa writes the Bhagavad Gita, I believe, Shri Bhagavatam. And in there, he writes about that the love of God begins to uphold its own architecture once there is freedom. You don't understand. Without freedom, your mind is dying. Without you being benevolent to yourself, what does that mean? That means imagine your mind is acting as the god of your body. Your mind chooses what happens to this body. So imagine now your mind looking at your body and being like, this is where I am. Your material existence becomes a source of inspiration for you. You become fascinated by how you have endured. The human body is so fragile, yet it endures. It endures as if there's a sort of, we are not born as people. We are born as waves of how design should express in the universal sector. And so that lion in the wallpaper that I've chosen is wondering about what's looking at it and what it's looking at. The game of man's mind, the search for the true observer. I think it was I think it was the show Family Guy or something, but they showed that kind of Warner bro, that kind of like Warner, a lion that's in the intros of that studio. It's like it's like that lion went to its parents and it's like, look, I did something with my life, you know. Oh man, imagination is fascinating, but without direction, it's like they say this often. It was something wise that I find it was ancient wisdom, where they would say a goal without a plan is delusion. But the issue was that any goal set in any moment of history will have to challenge the test of time. This is why playfulness is a much more karmically smoother way to navigate in this world, you know? I'm not joking. I'm not joking. Playfulness is being able to be at the edge of both worlds. Because truly, life is a chaotic place. If I really wanted to freak out about life, guess what? We don't need any. I don't need to. Before freaking out about wars and all this, I'm freaking out about, like, are we on a rock in the middle of nowhere? You know, like that is fascinating to me as much as it is shocking. You know, that we are on a pebble in a light beam, and there's war. Excuse me, there's war. You know, the war is just fighting over toys. You know, what if we're not purely material beings? Does that mean that our behavior should suggest that it's as if, like, what is the point of the mind? Conscious expressions, evolution into the unconscious. That means your mind doesn't exist to be the answer. It exists to pose the question. And some souls do, they have been taunted by the sands of the hourglass falling. They have watched their days and they have wondered, when will the time come? And they will realize that to be alive as a human being means to be able to move the self that is present. That means it's like this is the beginner, to conquer fear. Oh my God, that's like the first step. Now let's go 11 steps ahead. You know, who will you be when fear, desire, which are two sides of the same coin? You desire because you fear because you desire. I find it like this: it's a battlefield, this life, and it's a battlefield to constantly make, how can I say it? We are creatures of balance. Like, did you know, like, there's three bones in your ear that if they're kind of, if there is some sort of dysfunction there, the person loses balance. Do you know? So it's one of those things where we are creatures that are constantly trying to evolve in a balanced way. But what it is that we have built a system that is incredibly imbalanced. So we are realizing our ancestors were much, they felt the fires of chaos much more heavier than we do now. There was an intensity and wilderness to the world that it's as if it doesn't matter if you're still alive today. Trust me, your ancestors were more of a warrior than you. Even the weakest, you can say the beta a human, like 1,000 years ago was like 100 times more alpha than the alpha human we find in our current culture. Because it was, the world was more intense, so you had to come into terms with it more quickly. You know, it's like sometimes it's not about winning battles, sometimes the battles could be distractions. This is why ego could be easily manipulated, because ego is a singular kind of mind. The guy's chasing one thing. The violent person is chasing one thing. It's like an animal that's hungry. Give it what it wants and it's like it'll stop being an animal. The violent person is a mentality of allowing that behavior to be okay, not realizing it took us 4 billion years of evolution to consider it not okay. It took us a long time to create laws, but at the same time, it's like these laws have to do with the inner constitution of human beings. That means the Universal Declaration of Human Law, how can I, human rights, it's like those are the laws of man's mind, man's design. We have to preserve, at the same time, advance and change. I ask myself, okay, let's say we found a way to get 8 billion human beings to be present. Just for a second, forget their own past, forget the future, and just be in a world, simply in the present moment. Then what? You know, it's as if Buddha was there, I'm like, all right, Buddha, where do you see all of this going? And Buddha even gave an answer to that. Buddha was asked, like, to be honest, some people say Osho, I heard saying, I don't know, maybe it's the story, I don't know how authenticated the story is, but Buddha is asked, will there be another Buddha? And it's as if he spoke about Buddhahood as a Buddhic field, as a Buddhic nature. That means it doesn't matter what kind of human being you are. It doesn't really matter if you were raised in a fucked up place or in a good place. Okay? It doesn't matter. It's like every person is equal when it comes to wondering about the mind. Wondering about existence is a universally unifying and liberating task. What does that mean? That means imagine what you have in common with others is not what you know, it's what you don't know. So I am automatically, one thing I have in common with 8 billion human beings is we all don't know. And if a person has fears the hole in the ship, they will not block it. They will not kind of stop that hole where water's entering the ship. So it's one of those things where I'm just trying to say you're alive once, dear human being. Know your eyes. Know them. Don't just hover in them or as them. It's like don't just exist, live. But what is this living? This living has to do with 50% receiving from your world and 50% engaging and expressing. That means at least any person that wakes up, if you're a human being that wakes up, if you can have one conversation and listen to if you can have one new conversation and, oh god, how would I say it, receive from your world and express in your world, there's a threshold for it. It's kind of the exercise the mind needs. Your mind has to receive and express, and then it goes into an active momentum. Just like how the heart is endlessly beating, the mind is endlessly working. I'm not joking. Like when like I noticed this to such a deep degree where I had this dream where in the dream I could move. I was running at a very fast speed, like not like super fast, but faster than my normal speed, and I could go any direction. And even in the dream, I go at some point underwater. Like I'm running so quick from land, I also go underwater. But when I'm underwater in the dream, there's no fear of the breath because it's like, how do I say it? I wake up and I'm like, whoa, 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 my body is asleep, but my mind is creating a world where I can run in. And I was like, we don't know anything as a species about this mind. This is why we must just start right now organizing enough as a species to have exhibitions into the unknown. Elon Musk, he's such a good guy. He is like the Superman of the business world, you know. He is the super entrepreneur, and he says you have to have something to be inspired by throughout the day. And Elon Musk was smart enough to prioritize the advancement of civilization over personal supremacy. Like, so what? So what you show your power to someone? Everyone's temporary, you know? You think death cares what in what way you're dressed as? What I mean by that is that the temporal nature of life has a brilliant design to it. That design is being rhythmically embraced. So the best thing we as human beings can do is realize, okay, the body is temporary. That doesn't mean freak out. That means, all right, that's how the system is. That's how the program of the conscious waking state is. It's like I didn't choose spheres to like orbit around each other. I didn't choose light to enter the eyes of this biological creature. I didn't choose, like, how strange is it, guys, where the sun is spherical and our eyeball is spherical and light is like a line connecting these two dots. Like I'm telling you, it's a strange place we're alive. I don't understand the concept, the creation. I call this the hoax of normality. Normality is a hoax. Entertain it, enter civilization, be part of the parade, but I am telling you, at some point the heart will ask the mind, so now what? And the honest being, like the honest self, can only has the strength. Any person. Here's the thing, guys, this is something strange in man's psychology. The moment it's acknowledged, it can be handled. Anything that you're not conscious of, you really can't do much about, right? If there's a sticker attached behind you to your sweater, if you're not conscious of it, you won't know. Suddenly somebody may look and then be like, okay, there's a sticker behind this guy, you know? And he tells the guy and the guy takes off the sticker. So what I'm saying is like something wasn't conscious. The person had no idea the attention wasn't directed that way. But when the attention was directed that way, that person began asking their own questions. As they asked their own questions, they're like, really? There's a sticker behind my back? And then the guy goes and checks it out, you know, and he's like, oh yeah, there is a sticker behind my back. And while he picks off the sticker, he also scratches his back because his hand's already there. You become conscious of designs that you were not conscious before. If you are acquainted with the style of your intelligence, because everybody has a unique DNA, you have to think of your imagination as like this is strange, but like, you see how there's all these shows where human beings have superpowers, like DC Comics, Marvel Comics, like Japanese comics, like that Hero Academia thing. So there's like there's different there's Even in Vedanta, they acknowledge that the person who would meditate to find a sort of resolution to their psyche, to the living world, will eventually contemplate a state of being where there's more freedom. Because they have concentrated more than other people, they're seeing a more crystallized version of reality. So in some sense, their actions become more of, how can I tell you, they have less karmic weight. Because they have less karmic weight, the unauthentic action of an ego, of an ideologically possessed person, suddenly, like, it breaks. It's like it's like understanding makes your mind untouchable, as a sphere around you. How would I say it? There's better ways to say it. Think of it as if your imagination is the aura of your mind. That means right now I'm attempting in this talk to speak about reality, realizing this whole reality, it's like onion style multidimensionality. Like there's it's surrounded by unknown. So I'm a human being realizing that the unknown is more than the known. What are you going to do? So what does that mean? That means there's a complete freedom. We might not be able to access truth, but it means we are at least free to choose. So you can say the denial, the rejection from heaven was the free will. The rejection from a collective state was the emergence as an individual phenomenon. So we have to be careful, because I find people who get power start worshiping themselves. When they worship themselves, life becomes like they're alone on an island. Anytime you feel you are more special than your external phenomena, when you feel the inner reality is more special than the external phenomena, you are isolated in a room of, like, it's as if you're not living in the world, you're living in your mind. And so my effort with trying to distinguish, it was such a subtle solution I found, that we have just not been acknowledging it. They have been teaching kids about an objective evolution, but they have not been teaching the children of the world of a subjective evolution that took point simultaneously. The objective evolution completed. It didn't complete, but it ended into the free choice. That means something was being only updated by nature, and then suddenly at some point it segmented from nature. Now it was up to update itself. So this is why the greatest effort of man depends on the will of our ancestors, which is now genetically somehow their voice is in our being. Emotions do pass on as well, by the way, guys. What does that mean? That means the mind is an unknown space. The body is a known space. What is embodied can be known. What is not embodied or cannot be even considered, seen, is unobservable. That is unknown. So when you acknowledge the presence of the unknown, that means you're acknowledging how small your knowledge is. This is why I remember being in Iran and somehow finding myself, it's my talk 438, but it's in a different language. I gotta write the transcription. But pretty much I find myself in a group in this underground gathering where people have called this a spiritual, like a spiritual gathering. And in this spiritual gathering, they're introducing people one by one as master this, master that. Master this is going to come and talk about this, master that, right? And so I'm there listening, and I realize they're all talking about energy. And none of them even said the word spirit, or even though the whole theme of the place was a spiritual gathering, like nobody talked about anything spiritual. One guy even came and was just doing martial art demonstrations. I was like, this is badass, you know? But it has nothing to do with spirituality. Not that it has nothing to do. I mean, discipline, of course, is a part of concentration. But I'm saying, like, nobody acknowledged the elephant in the room. And last second, they asked me to speak. And it was weird because my Farsi wasn't that good. You know, it's like my mind is based more in English vocabulary than Farsi vocabulary. But anyways, I get called to talk there, and long story short, I find myself in a moment telling people, "Hey, stop chasing an outer teacher. Stop. There's the only purpose of the outer guru is to show you your inner guru. Because if you follow the outer guru, you're following some random being like." You're following some random being that you don't know, right? It's like, don't sacrifice your free will so easily to something that's just nice in one moment. Your mind deserves the task of the outer guru is to be a mirror. That means, what do you do with the mirror? It's not even a mirror you can take home. It's just a momentary mirror. And in that mirror, you realize, whoa, 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 why am I looking at others when the self is here? Oh my God, have I looked at myself? You know, and when I say how you look at yourself, there's two ways. There's looking at yourself as a as an objective being, as a subjective being. Actually, let's allow the third in regards to there being a witness. It's kind of like, imagine an educational system where the student goes there and he's like, what should I do? And the teacher's like, just study yourself, man. There isn't much you can do. Oh man, this world of ours is fascinating because everything that is seen inefficient, if the opposite was done, there's a greater chance at efficiency. So what I'm saying is, look at all the problems of your life and wonder about their opposite reflection. That means try to handle problems with an ability to acknowledge design. So a designer doesn't have an emotional story. You go ask a designer, what's the purpose of the universe? He's like, eyes open to design. That's it, right? It's like awareness is can acknowledge structure, and it can use it too. How fascinating is that? Our minds can invent. Nikola Tesla invented a lot of stuff, and he had beef with Edison at the time because they were promoting two different technological realities and motors. In other words, if Tesla was a football team and Edison was a football team, I would be I would be cheering the Tesla side because Tesla, he was a person so wondering, so able to attempt his wonder of his own questions, that he was on a bench and the AC motor that is kind of like the spark for our modern civilization, he drew it with a stick on the dirt. Imagine this dude kind of feeding the pigeons or something and like writing in his notebook on a bench, and suddenly he gets a vision where in that second he just grabs a stick and draws the designs of the AC motor on the dirt. And I could see how divine that moment must have been for Tesla. That means forget the religion. It was an invention. You know, and Tesla was like, if you check his life story, he had a very strict religious father that made him memorize endlessly the verses of the Bible or something, right? So he had an incredibly advanced mind when he went into the social sphere. Tesla has this quote where he says, like, Edison was really like bothering him. And he has this quote where he's like, where some people stole his ideas or something. And he tells them something very unique. He says, let me find the exact quote, hold on. Tesla future quote. Okay, here. Nikola Tesla says, let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments. The present is theirs. The future, for which I have really worked, is mine. So I always wondered, like in the documentary I saw about Tesla, like the president, when Tesla died, came and said this man was the most useful human being in our history. You know, it's like, I'm telling you, it's kind of fascinating. But he was a champion of civilization, and similar to Elon Musk as well, I find. You know, I noticed Elon Musk is advancing our external technologies. I thought, okay, let's work on the inner technology. But what it is his attention was towards a universal truth, and universal truths stick around. They're more eternal. So you can say when what's his name, Newton, he conceived of gravity, he knew that because gravity is going to continue, the concept is eternal. Because it's relevant to something that's happening, that continues to happen. As far as we know, we've had an eternal experience as a civilization. From the moment something was here, we've been around. From the moment of our conception, we still haven't, like the spark of human design, it continues. Whether it will be AI exploring the whole cosmos, whether it's we do attempt to harvest the energy of our sun from the orbit of from the atmosphere of the sun. But it's like, regardless of our dreams as a civilization, the journeyers must not be forgotten. Just like how a brain has different parts that are related to different tasks of the biology of the being. The biological expression of the being has to do with the brain. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, it's like, all right, neurons are running around, you know. But it means that certain parts of the brain are designed for a certain purpose. So I thought about it. It's like, okay, religions are uniting people. That's great. But what is the point? And I began to realize that civilization in the future generations, for the future generations, must be re-envisioned, redesigned as an efficient story of how light created history. I hope that this civilization becomes so aware, not to just objects. Like, we're pretty aware to objects. You know, if somebody like, throws a balloon your way, you'd be able to move your hands and catch it. Okay, so you are, especially with the slow speed of the balloon. So similarly, we are aware of an objective environment. Now, Mr. Within is saying, but are we truly aware of a subjective environment, or do we just think electrons are hallucinating humanhood? There is more. There is more, and it has not been acknowledged. So for me, it's like, my problem with the educational system is that, when are you guys going to talk about the unknown? When is the student going to realize that regardless of its professor, They're both staring at the unknown sky. It's about imagination. This is why Einstein was so ahead of his time, where he said imagination is the sign of true intelligence, because he knew eventually there will come a time where common intelligence is globalized. When common intelligence is globalized, what that means is, imagine we become as efficient as robots in doing everything, right? Objectively. So where does that lead us? To subjective space. In subjective space, it's as if every person has a creative potential. This is why the ability to see something new is more valuable than the ability to see something repeat. So when life becomes an endless repetition, you get bored. Of course, how long do you think the hamster can run in the hamster wheel? How long does the Buddhist think he can run in the wheel of karma? You get tired. You get tired as a soul from the ideology that you have inhabited for so long. And what happens? It doesn't mean you abandon ideology. You respect every experience of your life. That means, imagine every moment of your life is like a fruit, and it has a sort of taste and value, a sort of pleasure of it has an existential bliss to it. I'll tell you this story. There's this guy. I think everybody knows this story, but I'll say it, This story is this guy is walking in the woods, and he notices like at some point something is off. He feels intuitively off. He looks around and he suddenly sees there's a tiger, like how can I say it, like 5 meters beside him. Just the eyes of the tiger are just locked on him, as if like this tiger is way too, like that the body language of the tiger is way too excited to just to do nothing, right? It's just scanning first. So the guy notices a tiger scanning to attack, and he just runs. He's like, fuck this, he runs. And as he runs, like he's running, and he suddenly realizes he's reaching the edge of a cliff. He has enough time to get down on the cliff. The guy, he sees he has no choice, but there's this like tree at the edge of the cliff where its vines lead to, like you can hold on to the vines, like a ladder, like kind of like helicopter ladder kind of thing. Right? So he goes down on the vines, and the tiger is like, what the hell? I can't access that, And the tiger is just growling up there, so he can't go back up. Now, as he's there, as the story continues, and of course this is a playful story, what happens is there's this white mouse and this black mouse that come out of nowhere, and they start chewing the exact vines that it's like, I think the mice feel they don't know what this entity is, so they're just cutting off the whole vine. Strategic mice, but the sign is like it's a black mouse and a white mouse. Keep that in mind. That's important. So what happens is, in that moment, that guy's like, holy shit, it's like this is true animal wilderness. And as he's there, he's shocked, and he feels, wow, how cruel is life. But right there, he notices the greatest, most incredible strawberry. He sees a strawberry there. Like coincidentally, the greatest strawberries have grown right there beside those vines. And in that moment, the guy picks up the strawberry and eats it and says, wow, this is such an incredible moment, And the rest of the story, you can imagine what happens, You can even imagine the guy kind of climbing the tree up instead of kind of sticking around there, But anyways, guys, what I'm saying is that every moment holds within it a hidden bliss that only the true self can acknowledge. Satchidananda means that moment in life when you realize existence, and there being something that is conscious of existence is the most magnificent and advanced thing that creatures on this planet have been able to do. It's like whoa. It's kind of reawakening to the magnificence of your species in realizing the simple is held in such complex Excuse me. Sometimes I wonder how far ideology can take human beings. And I kind of realize we are obligated as a sort of response to our inevitable extinction to try to at least create the greatest journey. So what it is human civilization is like a wonderland, and it has different rides, and these different rides are in accordance to different ideas that are exerting power. You can say an idea is nothing on its own, but when a human being has that idea, because that idea can influence their behavior, that idea gets power, right? So it's kind of about like a symbiosis between the design of the idea and the witnessing living conscious being. Okay, guys, I'm gonna look at the chat right now. Let's see what's up. So welcome to the chat, Sengiz German. Also my own postings on. You know, Sengiz German, I read your comments. One thing I could tell you is that a man, the human being, can navigate their attention at different speeds. And so really when it comes to human interaction, it's more like I find first observe, then act. So what does that mean? That means if I think life is just a happy place, how big of a blind spot am I going to have? If I think life is just a purely 100% efficient, for me there was a vision of utopia that was like, I just visualized what if every human being was 100% efficient. You know, what if they had access to the whole brain, you know? And that's what technology is going to do, by the way, guys. Technology is not, I think before our heads get plugged into computers, we're going to plug computers to our heads to see if we can activate certain parts of the brain. Imagine in a really sci-fi future, there are hats you can wear that just that activate your whole brain. You know, imagine. Like, reality is, I find it's attention. I find that attention moves at different speeds. It honors the reality it is in first, then it incorporates other realities. In order to be able to have a sort of command over the objective environment, of course, we need to be superior to the objective environment. So we can say that the mind is playing hierarchical games with itself. These hierarchical games it is playing with itself has to do with the different environments it enters. Maybe in one environment a person enters, they feel it's hostile. One environment they enter, they feel it's pleasant, it's welcoming. You know, there may be a person who, like, I have the biggest thing I've noticed that in some sense, those in the lesser part of the hierarchy look at, you know, is that they look at if they are seen. What does that mean? That means that we are in a changing universe. It's hard for everybody to be something here. You know? So, Sengi's German, you say you did research. And in your research, you got a sort of view on the mind and time. So I'm telling you that yes, it's the thing is, like, I speak of scientific endeavors as mighty. You know, you know, the mathematical language is mighty, but It's bringing its findings to a fantasy land. It's bringing it to a civilization where human beings are not just inspired by rational behavior, but also irrational. So what does that mean? That means I could find the most perfect truth of externality. And what I'm saying is, like, imagine scientists could put the whole cosmos into an equation. Now, if they could do that, they would, in some sense, put this equation in like they would bring this equation back to a society that is going to the movies to watch science fiction films. Do you see what I mean? It's as if we are not just excited by truth, we are also excited by the evolution of our self-truth, right? Yeah, the hero's journey is I totally understand this. I think you're aware of like Carl Jung speaking about the hero archetype. The hero is a response. I consider it's a response. It's like the hero in every moment is the person who's aware of what's happening and responding to it. Do you know? Right? So it's like the heroic effort is see it this way. I'm curious to know, Sengiz, what you think is just a second. I think what I wanted to say was the evolution of thought, because at some point states of mind change, right? So it's like we got to acknowledge, how can we really judge people if the judge is changing himself too? I find it's not about trying to fit into an ideology, because some ideologies, like literally the shirt is too small, you'll feel suffocated if you wear that ideology. Sometimes the ideology is too big, you'll wear it and you'll feel loose in that ideology. Like nihilism is like an extra large shirt. You know, it's like you feel that everything is so empty that why even kind of like wear the proper, like, so what I mean is, I'm getting too excited here, but I think we have to acknowledge that we can't really define a changing system. And that's it's weird, but I find that any design reflects its opposite, which the opposite potentially can be an advantage or disadvantage. It's like this. For example, I see a cup right now, and the moment I see a cup and I see a certain liquid in the cup, my mind could wonder what other types of liquid could be in this cup, or what the same liquid could be in different types of cups. So what does that mean? That means the mind has a freedom to see in different views. And so people in this changing universe are going from one moment to another moment, to another moment, to another moment, next moment, next moment, next moment. And what are we finding? After we have expressed ourselves in a moment and we enter the next moment, eventually there is silence. And I find the ultimate mind is able to confront silence and stillness, which is the literally supernova explosion of all fears and desires in an instant. When you can understand that it's okay how life happens. It's just that your free will is being a part of it, and you can choose what to do with it, right? I find that we have to pose global problems so we find global solutions, and in the attempts for those global solutions, there will be unifications of man's mind. So I feel like if we literally think about it, if we think we're just 8 billion bodies, oh man, overpopulation, like chaos, violence, what are we going to do? It's like imagine you have a house party, and the more people who enter that house party, they're going to feel more stuffed, right? So what I'm saying is, like, we have to acknowledge that there's minds, and the potential of the mind is unknown. And if it's pretty much kind of like, I find the importance of a new global cultural narrative where we look at the future generations and we're like, okay, this is the story we were living. You guys get to choose to live your own story, but as we pass you this torch, at least look at its light before the light goes out. You know? Yeah, yeah. Chengiz, I'm reading your quote, and you say, I found out that truth itself is the lie of truth. Yeah, it's pretty much people reacting to emptiness when they see it. That emptiness gives of ultimate freedom, so any abstraction in the moment of confronting that emptiness can be seen as a sort of it can be personalized. Ideas have set up shop in man's mind, and so eventually I say the search for truth goes beyond the language threshold. When it goes beyond the language threshold, that means literally we can't speak about it, we can't relate to it. It's too instantaneous or too empty. We have two eyes. It is not too strange of an idea to think that when we are our language, the technology of language that we use as creatures is also dualistic. The balance of humanity is kind of realizing this. Carl Jung spoke about the animus and the anima. The anima was the male archetype, kind of realizing the female counterbalance. And in some sense, the animus was the female archetype realizing within the male counterbalance. And so what does that mean? That means the witnessing mind is being developed. It's an archetype, the animus, the anima. I find that archetype, that's a vision of the moment, how the self is, where there is balance being witnessed. So anyways, guys, if anybody wants to talk more, continue in the chat section, join this Facebook group that's in the link, and there we can, the ideas we talk about also sticks around in a place where others can see them too. But anyways, I simply wanted to say that the human being finds itself in a world. It finds itself to be a story of a self in that world. Now it chooses what it does. Every moment it wakes up, like Gandhi, you can choose to see. Gandhi was like, when I sleep, it's like that self dies, and when I wake up, a new self is born. Like Gandhi wasn't one kind of Gandhi to himself. Every day he was a new Gandhi to himself, right? That means his past didn't burden him. Those people who their past doesn't burden them, that's truly what the comedian is trying to do, to take the person's attention away from a sort of inefficient outlook to an efficient one, or a playful one at most. I look at this lion's eyes in the picture, and this lion is probably freaking out because of the cameraman. But what it is familiar minds acknowledging the unfamiliar, the unknown. Yeah, you mean the ancient Egyptian bird head dude? Yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, the world has such a history to it. Now, I want you to imagine it's not just that the winners wrote the story, it's that every person could have, every person that interprets history doesn't even interpret it the same. You see, it's like certain organizations in life. They have many eyes face. I have this line I wrote, where I said, many faces face the earth, and the earth faces many faces. There we go. Chengiz, do you want to explain a bit more by what you mean, how the archetype of the lion fits as an algorithm? You mean as a cultural algorithm? I could kind of see that. I feel language can't will is not a stable enough technology. Language is like an edge, where what surpasses beyond the edge of language is experience. If the truth is experiential, it doesn't matter what way it was given shape, you know? All right, guys, I need a quick intermission. I'll be back. Okay, everyone, I'm back. Needed to refresh there. The lions of mankind. Let's get back into this. The lion has honor because it is conscious of itself and what it can do. Mankind is a collection of minds wondering what will happen next. All of this is a search for the next efficient vision. The next efficient vision, it's like the next great chess move of human beings in a civilization, is not an individual chess move. Strangely, it's like the 8 billion somehow reestablishing a new rhythm of movement. You see, the view we have on ideology is kind of interesting. How would I say this? Just like the political system is evolving slower than the most updated citizen in that political sphere or in that society, I find similarly we find ourselves the story, the same way we see that it's like the political system changes slower than the person, is the same way the story of the world in regards to not the story of the world, the story of civilization. I'm treating all human beings that are conscious in a conscious state to be members of civilization. That means it's like the moment you open your eyes in your waking state, you're part of humanity. In your other states of being, who knows what you are. But I'm saying like, but what I'm saying is really is we have to establish new stories need to be said. New archetypes need to be entertained. New freedoms must be experienced internally. Globalization set us free from individual living. That means you can't avoid integration and the expansion of the cosmos. This is why I realize the past is gone for good. This is why honor the moment, take the moment as it comes, rather than really super planning into too much ahead of it. But sometimes the design is important. So I'll say it like this. It's like, imagine you're a child 100 years later from this moment, and you're suddenly like, let's say, like 1,000 years, humanity continues and becomes some evolved humanity, and you open your eyes as a kid there. Now, as your eyes are open, what narrative, as a character in that story of that moment in history, what archetypes are at your disposal? And that's the value. What we're really contributing to future generations is how their past looks like to them. How they will receive their past will suggest the ability of the future generations. And to be honest, they'll probably look at us and be like, oh my God, these savages, we'll always be more savage, to people generations ahead. Oh God. A glass of cold orange juice can bring world peace, guys. A quantum physicist once said that they asked him about the experiments of quantum physics, and he gave this metaphor. He said it's like taking a jaguar from the wilderness and putting this jaguar in a cage, and then seeing what a jaguar is, asking the question. It's as if you have encaged something and then are asking. You assume you know, then you act like you don't know, and that's a fallacy. I find that's an inefficiency. The mind has to trust something or it will feel non-existential. The same thing can go for what's happening now. We are caging ourselves in our beliefs and then wondering who we are, only to realize we're not in our natural state. You know, to be able to truly even able to be able to even see the language threshold means that you don't have problems with silence, right? So life doesn't have to always be an image in front of our eyes. Sometimes it is how the eyes are viewing the image. It's like prior to you doing anything, certain data is automatically being processed, right? So it's as if processed data is opening its eyes. So when it opens its eyes, it's like, how do I know certain things? How is the body healing itself? How is the consciousness animating conception? And so eventually you begin to realize that if you start, it depends on where you start. If you have the consideration that you are a conscious being, that means that you are saying your cause is known. That means it's as if like you're starting from the station of free will. It's kind of like before the child learns language, really it's nothing to itself. I find that the era of advanced communication calls people to do something with any sort of sight that could have a collective value. What does that mean? It's that weird moment where imagine if, like in the science fiction novel I wrote it, that there's like anyways, let me say it like this, that imagine your civilization, you were a child born in a civilization, and that civilization came to you and said, we need a call to action of all minds to begin writing at least one book in their lifetime that is communicating their inner realms, and to share the world what they saw of this world. And so imagine your species is saying a call to action, like it's commanding those who can to serve it, you know. So what is that service? I've noticed it's the bringing about of a new kind of renaissance. I called it the multi. I called it. I've called it many things, but I've called it like, you know, mostly the multidimensional renaissance, the inner renaissance. It's something that is happening not in accordance to the objectivity. The dude could be a person in a coffee shop drinking a coffee, but it's an inner renaissance in regards to how that person feels. Who is this that is holding this cup? It is no longer just in a personal bubble. The impersonal is being tapped into. What does that mean? That means care for the space of the mind where space and time formulate. Every person has an opportunity to move in many ways. Freedom at most means it's like you won't be internally free unless you free the world from your eyes. it was also said, you know, I'll tell you guys this kind of unique story, personal story. I went to a person, like a religious person in a mosque, and I asked them, what is the soul? And the guy looked at me and he's like, it's the secret of Allah. And I'm like, okay. And it was a short conversation that I realized instantly. It's as if it's not for the creation can never, the creation, even though it's in the image of the creator, but it can't be the creator, do you know? Because if it becomes the creator, if there's an integration of the free will with the divine will, there is no such thing as free will. So in order to be an individual, at least for helping to establish civilization, it doesn't mean you gotta like just be omniscience moving around in itself, you know. Your civilization requires a sort of mentality. It's as if like, sure, understanding the capacity of inner freedom, but at the same time noticing that in this moment of history has a voice. Every generation, they hear the voice of history, they hear the voice of their moment, and their moment is a part of history. So what I'm saying is like, you when you're ready to hear more than you when you're ready to see more than what you have seen, that's when you are ready to confront the unseen. When you're content, because it goes into the realms of subjective instantaneous change. Your inner, the person's subjective realm can change much quicker, way more quicker. That means the world I experience when my eyes are open, that's happening at a very, very certain slow speed. Like when I see wind blowing the trees, I'm like, all right, this is the speed of this reality. But when I close my eyes, it's as if the speed of the potentials of the various way, eventually one can, like, imagine you've closed your eyes and you've thought about many things. Now imagine you open your eyes and you're conscious, whether your eyes are closed or open, the moment there's a thought there or not. So for me, I realized, okay, let's assume nobody knows what they're doing. And then what would I do? And I would wonder about what I am. That's the natural way of going about it, I think. That it's not from the ignorance. It's not like we're ignoring the world and jumping to this. We are saying, all right, we acknowledge the world, but what if there's a potential of a multidimensionality where the greater dimension is unfathomable because it's not dualistic? What if we are creatures where it's pretty much conscious energy and energy can't be created or destroyed? So what's going on? It's like a changing manifestation that's all in a sight of one truth. That means it's like, what are we in a whirlpool around truth? Like going towards truth. Reality is more than just the beautiful thing about human life is the human being is designed to experience its humanity. We are designed to be humans, whether we think it's evolution's hand or God's hand. But we are creatures that have been designed. What that means is somehow a design has emerged. That's another way of saying we are emergent design, the emergence of manifest design in more sophisticated patterns. Our sophistication kind of suggests, so what is evolution doing? It is as if like this snowball that's, as it's going through time, is accumulating greater self-identification. So it's as if the world is changing, the creature's sense of self is changing. So if thought is related to matter, that thought is always changing. But if one finds themselves to be the witness of thought and matter, that becomes a strange moment, does it not? It's like, for me, I've called that, it's sight and emptiness. That means when I close my eyes and I imagine something, that imagined phenomena is sight and emptiness. But when I open my eyes and I see like an object, that's not sight and emptiness. The world is full. So it's that tension. So primarily it's like, think about this, that underneath everything that a human being thinks there is the movement of their attention in the moment. Right? It's not just your objective attention. The thing is, I'm suggesting that the only way you can consider even the idea that you're a pilot of your inner realms, of your plane of existence, and its subtlety. So it becomes one of those things where you can also, just like how you move your hand to pick up an object, you can project a thought to experience, subtly experience. That means I can pick up, for example, this cup and imagine there's two spoons in it instead of one. That imagination is an added thing. That means because I knew it wasn't there before and I brought it forth, that's why I call it a projection. Language is really evocational. To be honest, language doesn't have linear meaning. It just comes out of nowhere, right? It's like before I gave this talk, even the title of the talk didn't exist. So I'm telling you, language is evoked. And so magic was was that kind of chaotic point in our history where human beings who were conscious of language, they manipulated, they used that language for their ego. So they weren't really conscious of themselves as language, but it's like they used the language. So what does that mean? That means sometimes it's just like, that's why I found it weird that spelling has two meanings, right? And so it's one of those things where language can limit one's reality. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, this philosopher, German philosopher, he says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And then we have Hafez of Shirazi, this guy from 700 years ago, saying, this Persian poet saying, the words you speak become the house you live in. So do you see, the words you speak become the house you live in? So those people who manipulated language unauthentically, you can say, or with desire and fear whispering in their ear before their nature. So it's like what happens is misuse. That means it's like simulation game. It's a language simulation. It's like those people who did magic. They are putting language simulations into reality, right? And it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just that if you truly know power, you know that true power doesn't need to show its power. You know this because it is the ultimate. The ultimate doesn't change. It's an unconditional state. So all that requires to happen is that all those people who have a sort of battle plan violent mentality towards the species must just relax and realize that each idea in its moment has a design, but if the person's attention moves, the whole ideology can change, the whole spectrum can change. Anyways, guys, oh god, if anybody has a question, guys, I'm in a pretty engaged state of mind to kind of respond. If not, I think I'll tune out in a couple of minutes. Okay, guys. I think I'm gonna end the talk here, but the chat section should still be going. So feel free to continue, but I'm gonna tune out. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And one last thing, natural imagery is very crucial, and sometimes when the world is becoming an unnatural place, sometimes a return to nature would mean a sort of submission of a superiority over the world to first be able to see it. So it's life is fascinating in that way. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.